Good.
Good to go.
Oh, thank you. So once again, I will screen share a PowerPoint presentation related to this topic. Hold on a second. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about for the next 20 minutes or so is the African Development Bank's Dakar 2 Summit and the compacts, the country compact, the 40 country compacts that came out of that. Here we go. Maybe you can mute your microphone, Father Chica.
All right.
Thanks. So in January this year, the African Development Bank convened the Dakar 2 Summit in Senegal. And the title of the summit was Feed Africa, Food Sovereignty and Resilience, which sounds great. Nobody would argue with that. So it brought together 34 heads of state, 70 government ministers, and a boatload of development partners. The aim was to bolster food security and productivity across Africa, to reduce import dependence and transform the continent into a global breadbasket. Again, laudable aims, which on paper sound great. So, as a result, the 40 African countries implicated in this project unveiled their country food and agriculture delivery compacts. So these are kind of agreements signed off by each of the countries as to their involvement in this 10-year project. So the compacts aim to establish time-bound and measurable indicators for success, including specific national policies, incentives, and regulations conducive to increasing investments in the agricultural sector. They set targets for self-sufficiency, in particular of agricultural so-called value chains, and detailed roadmaps for seed systems, production, market access, and more. The aims on paper are laudable. They're good. We would agree, AFSA, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, would agree that it's great to reduce Africa's dependence on foreign imports of food and particularly agricultural inputs. I live in Senegal, and here 70% of all our food is imported. 70%. Everybody here seems to eat bread, a hangover from French colonialism, and every kilogram of flour, that is wheat flour, that is used to make that bread is imported from outside. There is no wheat produced in Senegal. I mean, if you have colleagues there from Botswana, you'll know. I used to live in Botswana, and I think apart from beef, pretty much everything else is imported from South Africa. But in many countries, they come from not just within other countries, but from outside Africa. Let's continue. So what is this initiative? It calls for an additional $61 billion with the aim of industrializing African food systems across the 40 compacts. We use the term industrialization often in our work, and it basically refers to the process of this modernization agenda that we see so much. But what it means in practice is trying to replicate what happens in farming systems in, for example, the USA, where you basically hit it with a load of chemical synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and you seed it with hybrid and genetically modified seeds. That's the future. That's modernization. That's industrialization. And we have a problem with that. So at least a quarter of the supposed this claimed budget is to be financed by the private sector, raising concerns about corporate influence. I mean, the industrialization agenda that we see across African agriculture is all about, where are those chemicals coming from? Where are the pesticides coming from? Where are the seeds, the hybrid seeds and GMOs coming from? They're coming from the 4 multinational corporations that control 80% of trade in seeds, agricultural chemicals, and so on. So people like Nestle's and Kellogg's and other seed companies. So we see in the compacts a lack of transparency, and we see control being handed over to global enterprises, control over indigenous agricultural assets. So here are, luckily we had an intern from George Washington University as a master's student to go through the 40 country compacts using some AI technology, some artificial intelligence technology, to be able to extract data from each of these documents, some of which run to 50 pages or so. And these are so you'll see from this chart that Nigeria, so these figures are in millions of dollars. So the top one, 5,700, is 5,700 million. So that's $5.7 billion. The big one there, Nigeria, over $10 billion. Small ones, where are we? In Botswana, 40 million only. Congo, Ethiopia, Gabon, Southern Africa, well, we've got Kenya, $3.7 billion, largely for ramping up horticulture production. Lesotho, 150 million, Malawi, 95 million, Mozambique, $4.5 billion. What else have we got? Rwanda, 1.3. Zambia, $5 billion. So each of these countries kind of putting a big chunk of investment or planning to invest huge amounts of money in this program. So apart from the private sector, we're also seeing development institutions. And these fall into 2 camps. The kind of, one is the development banks. So African Development Bank is the development bank, like also the Islamic Development Bank, the Arab Development Bank, I think it is the North African Development Bank. So these are banks. So what do banks do? They tend to lend money. So the issue of indebtedness comes into play there. Are countries or their farmers going to be incurring more debt? We already know that that African countries are squeezed to breaking point by international debt obligations. The other groups are what we call philanthrocapitalists like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is one of the big drivers of agricultural policy across Africa, actually, through its kind of agricultural arm, which is AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Also implicated are USAID, the American aid agency, the UN agencies FAO and IFAD, Food and Agriculture Organization, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Now, where we start to have a problem with it, because, you know, who's to complain about investment in African agriculture? You know, it's like African agriculture needs investment. We know this. We welcome it. Where we have a problem with it is where is that money going to be applied, and for what purposes, and what benefit or damage is that going to do to our constituencies and our environment? So where we start to have a problem is with this emphasis on commodity monocrops. Monocrops being kind of huge fields of the same thing. Typically, an African farm for a small-scale farmer is a mixture of different things, and that provides dietary diversity and resilience and biodiversity and agricultural biodiversity. So what we see here is a focus on maize, rice, soy, wheat, and oilseeds. These are the dominant kind of crops in these compacts. There are occasional mentions of local foods like cassava, vegetables, yams, and fruits, but these are very much secondary priorities. The emphasis is on those big, staple, starchy crops. Seeds. So the compacts promote so-called formal seed systems and GM, genetically modified seeds. These pose challenges to traditional farmer seed systems. So what's the problem with that? Well, hybrid and genetically modified seeds are expensive. They have to be bought every year by the farmer. They cannot be saved from year to year, as happens now in most small-scale farms. So where do they come from? They come from multinational seed corporations who increasingly control the seed sector. In Lesotho, for example, the compact calls for more certified seeds. But it kind of, this highlights the threats posed by formal seed systems, where many indigenous varieties in Lesotho have been replaced by commercial varieties, often imported and often ill-suited to Lesotho's climate and soils. I mean, one of the big ones, for example, maize. Maize is the big industrial crop in Africa. And the one central point about maize is that it's a thirsty crop. It's not an African origin. Its center of origin is in Mexico. So it came across a long time ago, but like now it's being pushed as the answer to Africa's food insecurity. But a lot of it is going for animal feed, maybe going out of Africa for animal feed, China, for example. And we're losing the biodiversity, and we're losing those nutritious crops of different varieties. Agrochemicals. So an environmental and economic time bomb. So the compacts endorse the heavy use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And obviously, in countries reliant on imports, this signifies a potential environmental disaster and an economic trap for African nations. For example, Sierra Leone seeks to, which is quite a small country, seeks to increase fertilizer use by 37,500 tons over the next 5 years, increasing its import dependency. I mean, one thing that COVID taught us was that Africa is very fragile because of its dependency on external sources of food and inputs. The war in Ukraine has amplified that problem. So Ukraine was a major grain exporter, and Russia was and still is a major exporter of fertilizer, the biggest in the world. So both of those have been disrupted, so that farms in Africa are now having to pay 3 times as much for chemical fertilizers than before, or their governments are having to do that. If, as many countries do, those countries are subsidizing the use of fertilizers to their farmers. And let's just be clear that chemical fertilizers and pesticides destroy soils. They basically replace the microbiological kind of the biology of the soil with 3 chemicals, NPK, and that is no way to that is, again, plays into the hands of the agrochemical companies, because you have to replace them every year. Whereas if you can feed your soil agroecologically and feed and support the natural state of the soil, then its soil fertility will grow, will be enhanced year on year instead of being broken down and destroyed. So land, a potential land grab nearly the size of Ghana. So collectively, the compacts call for the allocation of 21.9 million hectares of land for industrial production, equivalent in size to more than 8 times the surface area of Rwanda, or 7 times, for Father Chica, 7 times the surface area of Belgium. There are 100 hectares in 1 square kilometer. So 21 million hectares comes out at 219,000 square kilometers, which is bigger than Senegal, but slightly smaller than Ghana. So this is how much land is going to be put into industrial commercialized agriculture. I think it's worth pointing out that this initiative came from the African Development Bank. They hired the development consultants to put this together, and their president is former Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria. His name is Adesina, and he has been saying way back for the last 7-8 years at least, that Africa is only using 40% of its agricultural land, as if the rest of the land is just bare, just waiting to be used up. So in these compacts, we see the label put on non-commercialized lands as underutilized. So they kind of set the stage for the dispossession of traditionally managed lands, undermining centuries-old sustainable farming practices. I mean, wherever we see development, whether it's in terms of large-scale agriculture, plantations, whether it's mineral exploitation, extraction, whether it's oil and gas, what we see is increased pressure on the land and increased movement of people away from those lands, the dispossession of people from their traditional homelands. So those are the countries where we've managed to identify the amount of land that's new land for cultivation. So big ones: DRC, Egypt, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Rwanda, Tunisia. Let's move on. So water, again, a problem. The compacts allocate 6 million hectares, so that's 62,000 square kilometers of land designated for new mechanized irrigation systems. Now, in South Africa, you'll be well aware of the value of water and how tough it is when there's a shortage. So this focus on monocropping and increased irrigation has major implications for water resources in water-scarce regions and threatens to deplete Africa's already scarce water resources, further marginalizing smallholder farmers and triggering environmental and ecosystem degradation. Reshaping smallholder identity. So we interrogated the 40 compacts, and we found that 11 million farmers are due to be industrialized, as we put it. So the transformation that we see of the identity of African smallholders is from where they are now to becoming profit-centric models in stark contrast to community-driven food sovereignty. So they will become kind of ants in this kind of industrial, commercialized, large-scale monocropping system. For example, in Kenya, the compacts proposed to transform 2 million poor farmers into surplus producers through input finance and intensive agricultural extension support. So there, the new president, Ruto, is I heard him speak at the Dakar 2 summit, where I attended in here in Dakar in Senegal, and he said, we've done the analysis, and we see that agricultural production is in direct proportion to the amount of chemicals you inject into the soil and onto your plants. So there's another problem there. So doubling down on failed strategies. So we've talked about the Green Revolution. Now, the compacts don't explicitly call for a Green Revolution. In fact, the Alliance for a Green Revolution last year announced that AGRA, the GR in its name, no longer stands for Green Revolution. It's like, so what's left? It's the Alliance for Nothing in Africa. So they've kind of realized that Green Revolution is an unhelpful brand. But basically what they're proposing is the same thing. What these 40 compacts are proposing is the same approach. They use terms like climate smart, nature-based, digital ag, which are kind of buzzwords that obscure the true nature of this initiative to industrialize African agriculture for the benefit of multinational corporations. They adopt a one-size-fits-all approach that disregards the diverse social, ecological, and agricultural systems across the 40 countries. And that goes down to the compacts themselves. They were compiled by international development consultants from outside Africa, and they all follow. It's basically a template that that were filled in for each country. So it's not surprising that the agricultural approach is a template, and it's this kind of hit it with chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, hybrid and GMO seeds to grow commodity crops of maize, rice, wheat, soya. So in conclusion, we see this as old wine in a new bottle. The compacts repeat the reliance on the outdated and failed Green Revolution approach, and beneath their modern jargon lies an age-old blueprint catering to global corporate interests at the expense of African sustainable future. The solution, we're saying, a pivot towards agroecology, recognizing the intertwined nature of social and ecological elements of our food systems. So salvation lies not in commoditization, but in empowering Africa's smallholders, preserving Africa's biodiversity, and promoting truly sustainable practices. Do I have one more? So that poses the question, what now can we do about it? I'll stop there. If you want more information about the work of AFSA, then you can follow us on our website, www.afsafrica.org, and on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at AFSAFrica. I'll stop sharing there now. You're muted, Father Chika. I'm not hearing.
We're not hearing either.
We're not hearing you, Father Chika.
He's unmuted.
Father Chika. Are you hearing us, Father Chika? I'm writing this in the chat at the same time. Father Chika, can you check your microphone?
Hello?
Yes,
better.
You're back.
Okay, I have removed my headphone, probably. That's the problem. Okay, Michael, thank you for your input, but more importantly, for ending with a question. Okay, what can we do about it? So it's about exploring options for CPLO advocacy. But meanwhile, what are your thoughts about African Development Bank and vis-a-vis Dakar 2 and their own history of supporting agriculture? What are your thoughts? Then after that, we can say, well, then what can we do about it? What comes to your mind first? Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question for clarification. Maybe I missed this.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
This project has a projected budget of $61 billion US. Where is the bulk of that expected to come from? Or let me put the question another way around. How much of that is expected to come from within Africa, and how much comes from outside Africa?
Yeah, okay. So the bulk of it comes from only a small part of it comes from national government budgets. I mean, we know that African government budgets are already very limited, and often they look to foreign donors to support agriculture, particularly. We're saying that about 25% of it, about a quarter, is coming from the private sector. And that will be largely focused on agricultural production and processing zones, or agropoles, as they're called, I think, in French, which are going to be chunks of land near ports, usually, and kind of repurposing the kind of export processing zones for not just processing, but production. So that will be monocrop production and processing, often for export, sometimes outside Africa, sometimes perhaps within Africa, which might be more acceptable. The bulk of it is coming from. Let me just come up with the. I'm just opening a document that has a briefing on this. Okay, so what I'm seeing is, let me just share this very briefly. I'll show you what I've got in terms of briefing. Here we go. So the African Development Bank claims to have secured already a commitment of 50 billion. Although I think we're seeing more of a commitment of 30 billion right now, but an ask of up to 60 billion, 61. So where German government, 14 billion, African Development Bank, 10 billion, Islamic Development Bank, 7 billion, USAID, 5 billion, European Union, 4 billion, IFAD, 3 billion, Arab Bank for Economic Development, 2 billion. So that's 14, 24, 31, 36, 43, 45 billion from those 7. And just to be clear, this is the biggest African agricultural development program Africa has ever seen. So I hope that answers your question. I would add, we actually reached out to FIAN, civil society organization and human rights organization based in Germany and Europe. And they reached out to colleagues in the German government and said, oh, it says here that the African Development Bank is saying that you're putting in 14.34 billion. It's a very precise figure, whereas all the other ones are just round figures, you'll notice. And the German government officers said, no, nothing to do with us. We're not putting it. Maybe what they've done is they've taken all of the commitments that the German government has made to African agriculture over the next 10 years and are calling that commitments to this program, but we have not entered into any formal commitment to do that.
Okay.
Maybe one other side note is that, so a colleague from Oakland Institute, which is an American-based NGO and farmers' rights and land rights organization, championing particularly work against land grabs. They sent their researcher to DRC to investigate these agropoles, these agricultural production and processing centers. And they met with senior government representatives in the Ministry of Agriculture. And they said, no, we don't know anything about that. Can you share the compact with us? We haven't seen that yet. And this was like senior Ministry of Agriculture. So so these compacts have been kind of signed off at presidential level, and not necessarily, well, you know, I don't know how disconnected the DRC Ministry of Agriculture is. They didn't know anything about it.
It's okay. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Any other question of clarification or other forms of intervention? Yes, Pastor Gladys.
I will have to just allow Gladys to speak. Give me a second. Okay, Gladys, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you to Michael and the team and all the participants for giving us this opportunity to meet again and discuss issues that concern us. Thank
Oh, have we lost her?
I think we have lost her. She'll come back. She's sitting in Kampala.
Okay.
The Ugandan Justice and Peace Commission.
Okay.
We may just have to wait for a second.
If she comes back, we give her the opportunity.
Yeah. In the meantime, I wanted to ask another question. Either Chico or Michael, either of you or both of you, you've spoken a lot about the commercialization, the industrialization of agriculture, or the proposed industrialization of agriculture. On the other hand, we also heard this morning about the commodification of land. Now, to my mind, those two things almost go hand in hand. If you start to commercialize agriculture, take it out of smallholder agriculture, bringing in, as you say, mass inputs of fertilizer and chemicals, etc., agribusiness approach, in other words. Is it correct to say that at the same time you are commodifying the land upon which that agriculture takes place? Maybe you could just expand on that link a bit.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. We have seen this trend. I mean, going back, you know, I mean, this comes back to the land tenure discussion we were having earlier, where what's it called? Customary land tenure practice kind of approaches were the traditional way that land was allocated and shared by local leaders. Now, by local chiefs and leaders of those villages and so on. So what happened back in colonial times was that the colonials came in with their British or French land laws and kind of superimposed them on the on the customary land processes. And they are still competing. They're still both in play. And one of the things that creates is confusion and lack of clarity around who owns what. So you see so many disputes happening around land ownership, land tenure. But I think after where I saw it most was after the financial crisis of 2007-8. What we saw was global capital looking for a safe space to make a profit, and it all of a sudden wasn't in the stock markets. So where did they go? And there was a huge shift to see Africa as an opportunity for investment in large-scale agricultural initiatives. I mean, we have colleagues from Tanzania there. So, for example, in Tanzania, they set up the Tanzania Investment Bureau or whatever it was. So to be a kind of a one-stop shop for inward investment in large-scale agriculture. And they come in and they say, oh, we want to start a rice or sugarcane or whatever large-scale production and processing operation, some international, multinational corporation. And the investment bureau went, yeah, we got land all over the place. Help yourself, and here's a map, and it's readily available. But then they go to the villages and they start to talk to the local leadership, the traditional leadership, and they go, well, no, actually, there are people living on that space. So all of a sudden, they find themselves having to make contracts with 1,000 farmers to give up their land so that they can have the 5,000 hectares that they want for their project. But so that kind of launched a wave of investment, and what the international investors wanted was firm, solid access to land. So governments were kind of pushed to give or create those land ownership and hand over land to the investors. So yes, I think that's where that commodification kind of really started to get ramped up. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, just a little bit of input. First, just like Michael said, I will say yes. The two of them go hand in hand, and you notice too that it is more difficult to grab the community land. It is much easier to grab individual lands, okay, than community land. Because of a lot of things around that. So the laws that the governments in Africa are pushing, okay, in such a way that there is land registration that makes it easy. You can easily take it away, but in the customary system, it's not even documented. It's written in the life of the community members. And so, as Michael said, for you to get a community land, definitely you will need to, it's not issue of handing over paper to you. That will involve a lot of processes. And so for the African government to now begin to change the laws, so as to facilitate this. And the customary system of owning lines, like in my place today, people don't know what they're talking about, the government's tenure system. All they know is the customary system. So when people come for land, there's always a conflict. When you are telling them that the land that the government did this or said that, there's always a conflict about that. So it has continued that way. So I agree totally with you, Mike, that yes, the commodification of land goes hand in hand with industrial agriculture.
Thank you. Maybe we can ask Apopaska to try again with her point. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I'm being heard now.
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. I started by thanking all the presenters, all the participants, and Michael and the colleagues for giving us the opportunity to come together again to discuss issues that concern us as Africans. I would like to thank also my colleague Jacinto for the good elaborate presentation on Uganda's country's profile. Back to my concerns, it's in relation to the presentation we have just concluded, and also the earlier on presentation we had before the break. It's not different from what we are discussing. It still comes back to the issues of land. Because when we talk about agriculture, we realize that you cannot cultivate without land. And land becomes one of the major factors of production when it comes to agriculture. And we had a project as the Uganda Episcopal Conference on food security, which was implemented in northern Uganda, that is Gulu, and in northeastern Uganda, that is Karamoja. And as a national office or a conference, the concern was you cannot talk about food security, you cannot talk about agriculture, you cannot talk about industrialization without talking about land, because all these take place on land. And that brings us back to the forms of the land tenures, where yesterday in the presentations and also the different presentations and the submissions, we realized that the customary land ownership, it's at a very, very high risk. There was that comment that it's easier to grab individual land than communal land. But instead, I think the opposite is true in our situation of Uganda, where it's easier to grab land of the community than land of an individual. Because in Uganda, when an individual owns land, that they have the provision of surveying of the land and they get the freehold documentation. But for customary land, it's like owning everybody, the land belongs to everyone. And everyone sometimes is no one, because we have had situations where the government deal directly with the investors. The community is just surprised to see machines and investors starting their work on their land, on their traditional land. So how prepared our communities over this biggest agricultural development program for Africa? Because we don't cultivate in the urban areas, we cultivate in the rural areas. That is where there is land. And a case in point is that we did a pilot land survey in Karamoja, which is in northeastern Uganda, one of the most marginalized communities in Uganda, where we wanted to know, our interest was to know the sizes of the land and also the demarcation. But the customary land ownership, they even don't know, the communities do not even know the sizes of the land they own. And sometimes this land goes deep up to deep in the bushes there, where By the time people realize land has already been surveyed inside the bushes coming towards the communities, and that makes the community almost to have no land. So in our case, where we did a pilot survey, we had planned to survey like land for 10 groups, farmer groups. But on going to the ground, we ended up surveying only for one group. What was the reason? We had envisaged that possibly one group could own like maybe 50 to 100 acres of land. But when we went, in fact, we surveyed for two groups. When we went to survey, one group alone had over 1,000, like 1,200 acres of land, just for one group. Then the second group, of course, which has like maybe like 50 members, had over 2,000 acres of land. That shows that there is really land of the community, and I don't know how we can protect our communities from this treasure, because you find it's the only treasure we have. Like in Uganda, we have a bill, a land amendment bill. This land amendment bill is...
Please, can you be brief, Gladys? Yeah. Because our time is up already.
Okay, sorry. That land amendment bill talks about the compulsory acquisition of land by government. And when you talk about compulsory acquisition of land, which land does this really, which land becomes more vulnerable to this kind of law if it is passed? So to cut the long story short, as we plan to lobby maybe for the agri budgets, let's also look at plans to ensure that communal land is secured. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our time is up already, but I beg to take 2 more minutes. I asked Michael if he can respond to that. Then we just close the session.
Yeah, it's interesting that that comes from the message, Gladys's message from Uganda. Last year, no, year before last, we supported ESAF Uganda to put in a paper to the African Land Policy Center's annual conference, and it was about the success that they had in securing land titles for women in Uganda. So, because we're saying, oh, land titles, they're bad because it allows people to buy and sell land. Well, as Gladys mentioned, sometimes the communal, the customary land processes are not secure and can be manipulated one way or another to take land out of community use. That project in Uganda secured land for women through the development of land titles, and it was we've got a case study on it if people want to hear more about it. But ultimately, women jointly signed up to a land title with their husbands, so that there was joint ownership by the family of their plot of land, which secured it for the future, whether or not their interest wasn't particularly to sell it. Their interest was to secure it, because up until that time they did not have, certainly women did not have access to land. So the debate between the benefit of customary land tenure and land titles is not a clearly defined one, and I think needs to be looked at in the context of the particular country where, for example, here in Senegal, almost all the land is titled. It was very heavily colonized, and as I mentioned, I put in the chat, the colonial land laws were based on legal titles to land, which facilitate, as people have pointed out, the easy sale and exchange of land without reference to community leadership. But the customary land tenure can also be manipulated and exploited. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we cannot continue. Our time is up. The conversation remains.
Chika,
remains open.
We
Yes.
do have on our side a few extra minutes. I'm not sure if you have to go to something else, but I wanted to ask you, from the perspective of Our Land is Our Life, for those on the course here who might want to, I don't know, join the platform or keep in touch with what Our Land, Our Life is doing, do you have a mailing list that they can apply to join, or do you have regular online meetings? What's the procedure for those who want to follow up with the platform?
Okay, thank you. If you had me earlier on, when I was introducing the platform, we do not speak about membership of platform. We speak about actors of the platform. And I gave reasons for that, because it might not be easy to dictate to a big organization like AFSA. It will not be easy to dictate to the church, SECAM, or even the regional conference. So we do not, it is a loose platform, yet very, very strong platform. So if you want to join the platform, you're just free. You can email me, you can email Manny, you can email Michael, or any of us. Just bring it to the platform. We don't have protocols except commitment to work with church, faith and non-faith actors, that openness, that commitment, and to struggle with communities.
Good, thank you. I will circulate email addresses to the members here. I have email addresses for Michael and for Manny.
Okay. I don't know whether we still have some time, because the hands are up again. Michael? Minute, 1 minute.
Well, okay, thank you, Father Chika. I mean, originally this session was going to go up until the top of the hour. It was only when we had some of our other expert speakers drop out that we kind of thought maybe we could wrap it up in an hour. But I would be very grateful if we could continue for a few more minutes.
All right, if that is the case, because I'm working with the schedule I have here, so if we can wrap up at the top of the hour, I'm very, very comfortable with that. If others accept that, I'm happy with that. Yeah,
we would probably need to just finish, let us say, by 10 to 1, if that's okay. So it gives us another 10 minutes. I see that Manny had his hand up.
All right. I'm very happy with that.
Before Manny comes in, can I repeat the question that I put at the end of the presentation that I did, which was like, what can we do about it? So my question is, what can the CPLOs offer in terms of what can they do in terms of responding to these major threats to the livelihoods of our constituencies?
Okay, please keep that in mind. Let me give you space to Manny after we come back to that particular Manny briefly, so that we come to this question that Michael raised.
I would actually, that was going to be my follow-up. It's important to listen to the CPLOs. Now, what are their thoughts? Because just to say that I shared in the chat that SIDSE Land and Food Group had discussed this issue as well, of these big investments. And we are advancing, so we are open to explore and collaborate with our African partners how to address this. So we have some ideas, but it would be good to hear from those participants there what you think. How do you see yourself playing a role?
Okay, come back to that question. So what can you do about it? What options do you think that we can explore as CPLO, either at your national level, or at the community level, or at the regional level, or sub-regional level?
I'm not sure that we're going to get an immediate answer to that question. We won't. I don't think the people in the room were expecting that particular question now. But also, we have 6 CPLOs represented in the room, but there are another 1 or 2 represented in the amongst the attendees online. But there are a total of 15 around Africa. So, in other words, we are missing quite a number at the moment. I would like to suggest that perhaps what we could do in a few weeks from now, or maybe a month or so, would be to organize a specific online occasion where we can get all of the CPLOs together with you 3 guys, perhaps, from Our Land, Our Life, and prepare a discussion on what role CPLOs can play in this regard, where we all have some time to think about it, and then have a more fruitful engagement. And I'll undertake to mobilize as many of the 15 CPLO officers as I can for such an engagement.
Okay. All right. That is a good welcome idea from my side.
Yeah, and
Yes, Manny.
Yeah, I would just like to emphasize that we had some discussions with Father Jaman, and unfortunately, I think he was not able to join the session this morning, if I understood correctly. But as you know, SECAM is trying to mobilize a multi-level advocacy for the climate, and industrial agriculture does contribute significantly to the climate crisis, and therefore this investment in scaling up industrial agriculture will have impact to climate. At the same time, real impacts on communities that will be displaced because where will they find this land where they will set up all these big agribusiness investments? So and that SECAM is ready to is part of this platform. Our Land is Our Life, and is in fact the one who started it. And so it would be you could also reach out to SECAM and maybe be part of developing a multi-level advocacy within the Catholic Church too, and bring in other non-church actors in the process for such advocacy. And on Thursday, there is this case of SIAT, where it involves an agribusiness investment by a Belgian company. And you can see there how, in concrete, actually, advocacy can be pursued in a collaborative way. And although there is no CPLOs in the countries that are, or the CPLOs, at least in Nigeria, have not yet been engaged, but many church actors are now. And I think if we have CPLOs who are able to address their Congress or their parliament, then there is certainly space for your engagement. Lastly, I don't know if it was mentioned in this morning's session, SECAM is involved in ensuring corporate accountability or advocating for greater corporate accountability of these investments, in these investors. And that's why it is involved in lobbying towards having a binding treaty. Of course, it's a long struggle to get such legally binding instrument that can mitigate these human rights violations when there are these large-scale investments. But that is also another area where the CPLOs can be collaborating in view of these huge investments that will be expected to come to Africa and displacing small-scale farmers.
Okay, thank you, Manny. Any other intervention? We still have 5 minutes. Okay,
Yeah.
yes, Michael?
Yeah, so I guess, and thank you, Mike, for the suggestion that we call a meeting to discuss how we can collaborate to meet the challenge that is being presented by this Dakar 2 initiative, which is in its early stages. It's a 10-year program that only, you know, that's basically on paper at the moment. It's yet to really get moving on the ground. So we do have some time to kind of think it through. We just mentioned that AFSA, we are developing a protocol and a memorandum of understanding with the Pan-African Parliament. Now, I don't know if that's within the purview of the CPLOs, but they are developing model laws that can be adopted by African Union member states. And one of them is on climate, so that's happening now. And sorry, is on food policy. Another one is on soil. So, and another one on seeds. So the issue of soil protection and the issue of seeds, particularly farmer managed seed systems, as an alternative to the formal seed system of hybrids and GMOs. These are both kind of areas that we could maybe look to gather support in making sure that those model laws reflected the real needs of our communities. Yeah, thanks.
Do that. Thank you.
Okay.
We don't have any
Okay.
questions emerging from the room here, Chika, so this is a good moment to wrap it up, I think.
Yes. So on behalf of the panelists and the organizers, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to meeting you again tomorrow in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in Brussels time and 12 noon West African time. It has been a wonderful exchange, and we're looking forward to more engagement and more collaborative work with the CPLOs and other actors in that room. So once more, say thank you, and I want to bring this session to an end. So Mike, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chika. Thank you to Michael, to Masa, and to Manny as well for your input. It was really very thorough. To be honest, too much to take in at one sitting. We're going to have to read through those PowerPoint presentations again, I think, to get the benefit of all of them. But I'll make sure that they are distributed to both the people present here in the room and also those who've been joining us online